Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. Michael Crichton said, "Historically, the claim of consensus has been the first refuge of scoundrels. It's a way to avoid debate by claiming that the matter is already settled. Whenever you hear the consensus of scientists agrees on something or other, reach for your wallet because you are being had." He also said, "The greatest challenge facing mankind is the challenge of distinguishing reality from fantasy, truth from propaganda." Perceiving the truth has always been a challenge to mankind, but in the information age, or as I think of it, the disinformation age, it takes on a special urgency and importance. And President Kennedy said, "A nation that is afraid to let its people judge the truth and falsehood in an open market is a nation that's afraid of its people." Now let's take a look at how this relates to widespread claims of a climate emergency. This graph was in the 1990 report of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It showed a very warm medieval warm period and a very cold Little Ice Age. And it showed that the warming which occurred since the end of the Little Ice Age began around 1850 and ended around 1940. But in the 2001 report, they erased the medieval warm period, they erased the Little Ice Age, and replaced it with a hockey stick of warming over the past 100 years. This graph, which completely rewrote climate history, was created by Michael Mann. Michael Mann's rewriting climate history was called by his co-workers Mike's nature trick to hide the decline. This rewriting of Earth's history was created by completely fraudulent junk science. Carl Sagan said, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." But Michael Mann's rewriting of climate history used extremely weak evidence. His hockey stick was described by other scientists as being obvious fraud, very sloppy, dishonest, bad science, worthless. He was described as being a disgrace to the profession. Regardless of his fraud, the press defends him religiously because he says what they want to hear. Like this article from the Australia Broadcast Corporation. They wrote, "Attacks on Michael Mann's hockey stick graph track to those whose interests are threatened." The article went on with the usual propaganda about global warming and green energy. But the alleged journalists at ABC only spoke to Michael Mann and none of his critics. This is like holding a trial with a defense and no prosecution. Michael Mann says his accusers are evil, and that's as far as these journalists were willing to go. Another analogy would be holding a sporting event where only one individual or team is allowed to take the field. People who are confident of their abilities are eager to engage in competition in a public forum. But Michael Mann and climate alarmists in general refuse to debate because their ideas don't stand up to any scrutiny. Here's a similar article from Vice News. They say that people who criticize junk climate science are evil and shouldn't be listened to. The critics aren't allowed to present their position. They're just passed off as being evil. Nobody would put up with a one-sided competition in sports, but in journalism, that's the gold standard. Their agenda doesn't withstand scrutiny, so they don't allow any other points of view to be presented. Michael Mann tweeted this yesterday. "Mark Morano is one of the most prominent industry-funded climate change deniers. Mark Morano would be happy to debate Michael Mann any time, but Michael Mann refuses to do that. If Michael Mann was confident in his position, he would be eager to debate and show that Mark Morano is wrong. But instead he just says, anybody who disagrees with me is evil." In fact, he says that the entire Republican Party is one of the most purely evil entities in the world today. And he even said that the New York Times was evil for reporting that Democrats were in trouble in the upcoming election. He says that Democrats losing a Democratic election would be losing democracy. Democrats are terrified by the idea of free speech and competition, as evidenced by their attacks on Elon Musk recently. Their ideas don't withstand scrutiny, so they do not want to allow free speech on Twitter. But getting back to Michael Mann, here's some more astonishing claims that he made. Earth's carbon dioxide levels are about 420 parts per million compared to 280 before the Industrial Revolution. Michael Mann suggests a home experiment. Take a clear bowl of water and put a few drops of black ink in it. The water turns black. Certain chemicals have a very potent impact in very low concentrations. That's true of cyanide. He's comparing carbon dioxide to black ink and cyanide. But carbon dioxide is a colorless, odorless gas which forms the basis of all life on Earth. NASA shows that Earth has gotten much greener as carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere have increased over the last few decades. NASA describes it as carbon dioxide fertilization, but Michael Mann compares carbon dioxide to cyanide. And if carbon dioxide was like black ink polluting water, every time Michael Mann opened his mouth, we would see a cloud of black smoke coming out. Human breath contains carbon dioxide at levels 100 times higher than the ambient in the air. Michael Mann makes claims with no evidence, much less extraordinary evidence. He demands $500 billion in climate investments without producing any legitimate evidence in support of his ideas. It's reported that Michael Mann has become very wealthy pushing his junk science. And when he gets challenged by people, his response is to sue them. He sued Dr. Tim Ball and kept him in court for years. Michael Mann caused the Ball family to rack up about $1 million in legal expenses. But Mann never had any intention of following through with the lawsuit. That would have required that he produce evidence of how his work was done, and his work is fraudulent, so he couldn't do that. The judge waited for years, but Michael Mann never produced the evidence, so the judge ruled against him and in favor of Dr. Tim Ball. The judge also ordered Michael Mann to pay the legal expenses which Dr. Ball had racked up, and Michael Mann's lawyers agreed to do that. But Michael Mann, being the corrupt, rotten person that he is, has never paid up. This left the Ball family with more than $1 million in legal fees, which they had to pay out of their own pocket. The stress of all this directly led to Dr. Ball's early demise, as he passed away a few weeks ago. 6 years ago, Dr. Ball and I did a speaking tour in Australia, and this photograph was taken at an event we did in Sydney. His family is in dire financial straits because of Michael Mann's malfeasance and dishonesty. You can help the family out by going to Dr. Ball's blog at generalistjournal.com and making a donation. Dr. Ball was the exact opposite of Michael Mann. He was an extraordinarily decent and honest scientist. Toto would be very appreciative if you could help the Ball family out. Toto has been pulling back the curtain on frauds like Michael Mann for the past 14 years. You can visit him, Kyrie, Caesar, Toki, and Upla on the web at realclimatescience.com.